So our next panel is Peter Singer, who you I think all know. He is a strategist and senior fellow here at New America and also professor of practice at Arizona State University. So we're going to begin with a short video that Peter's put together, and then he's going to speak to us about lessons from the past and present for the future of war. So thanks so much.
This year we celebrate the 250th birthday of our nation. And across those 10 generations, a defining feature of Americans has been their relentless drive to change the world, to change themselves. The same can be said of our professional military, also celebrating its 250th. For each generation of American soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and now Guardians, there's been a moment when their decision has simply been change or lose. Back then, our military transformed itself from ill-trained militia, which ran away from its first fight at the Battle of Long Island, into a skilled Continental Army that won just a few years later at Yorktown. To move from history's battlefields to today's, we see the same truths in action. Conflicts from Ukraine to Gaza show how the very same characteristics of learning, innovation, and adaptability are the determinants to victory. But both in that history and in the contemporary lessons, we also see three calls for action to honor that history and to maintain those values through our own relentless learning, innovation, and adaptability. The first is the challenge to, as it says there, master the new math. Abraham Lincoln recognized as the core factory between victory and defeat in the Civil War, and frankly, every war that we have fought before and since, is what he termed the, quote, awful arithmetic of war. War is a contest of blood and treasure, and each can and ultimately must be counted and measured. Yet now this arithmetic has a new factor. via generative AI algorithms and swarms of tiny drones, and the accompanying opportunities and costs that are created by them. This factor is changing the calculations in that awful arithmetic by literal orders of magnitude. Looking back, for example, a key strategy for the United States during the Cold War was cost imposition. Expensive programs like Stealth and Star Wars were not just about their strategic value, they were also about the signal that they sent to the Soviets that their economy and their war machine simply could not keep pace with ours, and that it was what ultimately led Gorbachev to conclude the same, which ended the decades-long conflict. The same concept of cost imposition was elemental to the most celebrated operations of the last year. In Operation Spider's Web, Ukraine used inexpensive drones, reportedly costing less than $500 each, to damage multi-million-dollar strategic aircraft, degrading Russia's long-range strike capabilities for years to come. Similarly, in Operation Rising Lion, cheap Israeli drones took out a network of multi-million-dollar Iranian surface-to-air missiles and radars, which then paved the way for the destruction of tens of billions of dollars worth of command and control and nuclear facilities. In each of these operations, the tactical became the strategic through new operational concepts that leveraged the new math of new technologies. Now let's contrast that with our own approaches, which still overwhelmingly rely on sophisticated but costly technologic overmatch. Perhaps our most celebrated military operation of the last year was Operation Midnight Hammer. Now, there's an ongoing debate on whether the strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities left them, quote, decimated, or, quote, the programs were still intact, set back maybe a few months, quote, to quote from two different US military reports. But my focus today is on the awful arithmetic. From the $18 million in flight costs for the 7 B-2 bombers to the $1.87 million per Tomahawk missile that was fired from our subs, the estimated cost of just the strike package was $196 million. This does not include the $2.1 billion cost for each of the 7 bombers or the $4.3 billion cost for the submarine. The Operation Rough Rider, the strikes against the Houthis last spring, has even worse math. Roughly $5 billion worth of munitions and operational costs were expended to stop attacks on Red Sea shipping, which then simply started back up last week. The same math haunts the ongoing not-so-covert operations in the Caribbean, where a 39-foot civilian flipper-type motorboat with 4 200-horsepower engines, which you can buy for new on boats.com for $400,000, was reportedly destroyed by a $33 million Predator drone backed by a force mixing everything from 10 109 million F-35Bs to a $1.5 billion amphibious assault ship. The math is even worse on the defense. Take when a wave of 19 Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace last month. The Gerber-type drones cost as little as $10,000 each, and thus are often used as decoys to misdirect and overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses. We countered them with a response force of F-35 and F-16 fighter jets, AWACS, and helicopters, which in sum total cost roughly $500 million just to buy, let alone operate. That force then shot down just 4 of the 19 $10,000 drones with AMRAAM missiles, which each cost over $1.6 million. In turn, think about how challenging U.S. forces found it not to attack the Houthis, but to defend the billions of dollars worth of warships where the Houthis were using this very same cheap tech. To defend themselves, our naval forces fired or reported 120 SM-2, 80 SM-6, and 20 SM-3 missiles, which cost each roughly $2.1 million, $3.9 million, and over $9.6 million each. And this is to defend against a non-state group operating out of the 187th largest economy in the world, which is able to fire mere hundreds of drones and missiles. Need I remind you that our pacing threat is the economy on pace to be the largest in the world, which will be able to fire not hundreds, but hundreds of thousands and likely millions of missiles and drones. When you spend orders of magnitude more than your foe, this is what is known as a, quote, losing equation. And if we don't change this math, we will need an update to Norm Augustine's infamous law of defense acquisitions. Back in 1979, Augustine calculated that if the Pentagon couldn't curtail the cost curve of its purchasing by 2054, we wouldn't be able to afford a single plane. My 2025 version is that if we don't master the new math of the battlefield, we won't be able to afford to win a single battle. Even in our best laid plans for future battlefields, there is a harsh reality of the numbers and a lack of urgency about them. The math, not merely of the past, but of current battlefields, remains literally orders of magnitude beyond what our budget plans to spend, our industry plans to build, our acquisition system is able to contract, and thus what our military will deploy. Think about how Ukraine is on pace to build, buy, and use over 4 million drones this year, to the US plan to gain tens of thousands, if everything in that plan works perfectly, which of course they often don't. If we ever want to get out of this losing equation, which risks losing wars, we must treat the development and fielding of attritable, affordable, and autonomously enabled systems for use in everything from strike to ISR to deception in every domain, not just as a one-off project, but as a focus of a high-velocity acquisition culture. The proof of our success will be when low-cost systems that deliver not just tactical but strategic effects cease to be a single-digit percentage of our major program acquisitions. In turn, our doctrine has to change in how we would use and defend against the new math. Second, the need to build cognitive toughness. Coming from these numbers is maybe an even more profound and challenging lesson in how we have and how we should envision the human dimension of war. A generation that was shaped by wars like Iraq and Afghanistan frequently used the term strategic corporal to lament how challenges over rules of engagement in the context of complex counterinsurgency could lead junior troops to take an action, say at some checkpoint, at a house raid, that might undermine the overall mission, or perhaps even worse, be reported by the media. That's a debate for those who want to relitigate the past and fight battles in our political culture wars. What I hope we focus on instead is how to prepare our next generation of forces for the actual battlefield. And here, the term is taking on a different meaning, one of force multiplier. New weapons like drones, long-range missiles, and cyber give our lowest echelons unprecedented reach and lethality. A small unit led by someone in their 20s will not just be asked to take the next hill, but perhaps to cause a potentially war-winning effect on a hill thousands of miles away. Or maybe even they'll cause that effect in a totally different domain from the focus of their home service. For instance, a young Army or Marine captain can now fire a missile that can sink an enemy invasion fleet, or a Navy, Air Force, or Space Force, NCO, could deliver malware that could shut down a satellite in space. The outcome is that the future fight will not be decided merely by brawn. But that's nothing new. It's just what happened in the last World War, where it was the brainy Dwight Eisenhower that led at the strategic level. And it was the tiny 5'5", 110-pound Audie Murphy who became America's most decorated soldier at the tactical level. And just as the physical side of war increasingly brings together humans and ever-improving machines, that intelligence will also be both machine and human. The human intelligence side, in fact, becomes even more important in a world of ever-improving machines. AI excels at speed, scale, pattern recognition. Humans were better at contextual understanding, complex judgment, and generating truly original and resonant forms of creativity based on lived experience, which is what characterizes much of politics and war. To put it another way, machines are good at rules, humans at exceptions, and war is the realm of both. Thus, any future victory will still depend on the thinkers, even in a world of algorithms. If we want our war fighters to be war winners, they will need to be problem solvers who can make instantaneous, high-stakes decisions and leverage machine speed technology and mass amounts of data. They will need to be capable of both independent action and rapid collaboration across vast distances and domains, masters of both themselves and distributed operations. This demands not merely physical toughness, but a new kind of mental toughness, the ability to process immense amounts of information and adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. We must thus cultivate those traits from day one, through how we recruit, select, and treat our troops, especially with rigorous, realistic training scenarios that push not merely their physical, but their mental boundaries. Third, the need to learn to win. Our adversary's success in moving forward in political, economic, military, and technological capability has come from a dedicated effort of what's been called civil-military fusion by bringing together their universities and their warfighters. What nations like China are doing right now, it has reflections in our own history, where in the words of the Saturday Evening Post, quote, college professors were vital in the fight to win World War II, lending their time and research to everything from building bombs to creating the most effective wartime propaganda, end quote. In turn, authoritarians' achievement in pushing back against democracies over the last decade have all come from the cognitive warfighting domain, by them recognizing the centrality of perceptions, decisions, the mind, in all things. In short, our foes work across their society and they seek to master the mental side of battle. As a result, both to mirror our own history and to win the future, those of us who care about U.S. national security, and that means also to think about U.S. national security, must compete and contrast with our foes' shared effort. Thus, our collective civil-military challenge of change or lose, just as it was in the past, depends not merely on the physical side, but on thoughtful analysis and research, rigorously exploring new trends, stress testing future scenarios, challenging orthodoxies, and offering outside-the-box thinking. As we saw in past American successes, ranging from the story of the tank to the aircraft carrier in the first half of the 20th century, to the military reform movements and what followed Vietnam, this means not just allowing, but encouraging the professional debate and even dissent that is necessary to identify, challenge, and cast aside outdated assumptions, to create a faster military adaptation cycle, and to drive forward what needs changing. It also means promoting and reporting not just what works, but identifying and writing about what doesn't. For instance, George Patton is one of the most celebrated warrior leaders in today's discourse. But when we look for guides for our current and future leaders, we would do well to remember the actual history, not just the movie and the memes. Patton was not just a doer. He was also an innovative and often iconoclastic thinker, as well as a prolific writer. Over Patton's career, he wrote an amazing 1,695 pages of journal articles, including one of speculative fiction on armored warfare, also reports, speeches, letters, and even poetry. If we similarly want to grow the warfighters who will be war winners of tomorrow, we should not disdain professional military education, the role of academia, and the toil of writing and research. Instead, we should seek to invigorate it, such as by developing new doctrines, integrating new technologies like AI and simulation, and treating the study of cognitive warfare as a foundational rather than as a niche concept. It also means not just supporting that research, but also engaging with the best of thinking across our great society, rather than throwing up organizational, cultural, and even political barriers between the military and the academy. In short, just as in our democracy, the future of American security depends on a healthy civil, military, and intellectual partnership, one in which both sides respect each other and what they bring to the table, where research informs policy and military thinking, and professional experience blends with academic theory. This is how we ensure not just that our democracy remains vibrant, but that our forces in the field avoid defeats caused by weak thinking and faulty assumptions. In sum, the future war winners will be the war fighters and defense innovators who learn how best to fuse human intelligence with machine speed across the wide range of demands. That also means viewing the many national security institutions that will shape and support that learning, that innovation, that adaptability. Those institutions might be located anywhere from the barracks to the gyms, Pentagon offices, operational commands, assembly lines, corporate cubicles, universities, war colleges, think tanks, and defense media. They're all part of a single interconnected ecosystem that all contribute to promoting the most adaptable and cognitively superior force possible. The same truths will hold in the future. Americans have won and will win by embracing learning, innovation, and adaptability. Thank you.
Okay.